In this example we're going to take what we had in the last and add a bit of action script driven animation, so basically animation that's coded rather than done in a timeline. This can be a little bit more complex, but the results usually outweigh any problems you might encounter. Okay, so currently we set the position to 10 pixels when we are revealing the menu for each item, and then we set them back to -400 when we're hiding them. What we need to do in theory is we need to add an event listener to each one of these for enter frame, or it could be set interval if you wanted to do it independent of the timeline, to move based on frames or based on seconds each item, and that's how the animation works. So the first thing I'm going to do is to start describing the function that I'm going to use for that. So I'll call that function move menu item, and it will be listening for an event, because enter frame comes from event, and we will add the event listener at the point where we reveal. So we'll test it on organization_MC by adding the event listener, which will be event.enter frame. Return, put them properly, and then the name of the function, which is move menu item. Okay, so that's all set up in principle, and the next thing I want to do is I want to initialize a property that I'm going to add to each movie clip, which will be called Vx, so a velocity in the x, equals and I'll say in this case 25. So what I want to do then is to try and at least get the item moving. So what we'll try is something pretty straightforward first. E.target, which refers specifically to the item that's triggered this function. Dot x will plus and equal e dot target dot vx. So every time the frame is entered, it will add 25 pixels continuously, and this will carry on forever. So let's see what happens. There we go, keeps on going. If I roll out, it'll set it going. And there we go. So obviously we need to restrain that, or constrain that, to a specific bound. So we'll say that if e.target.x is less than 400, actually no, sorry, less than 10, to do this. There we go. So it overshoots the end, and we can address that with a simple else. So we put the else on. e.target.x equals 10. So when it comes, and then once it overshoots, it stops back. It's a little bit of a jolt because of the distance that it moves. It's moving 25 every single time, but it snaps back pretty reasonably well. We could address it either by speeding up the frame rate and reducing the amount of pixels we move everything. That would make it a little bit smoother, but for now we'll just stick with what we've got. Okay. So, what we also need it to do is to then stop listening for the event once we don't require it, and that would be at the point where it's reached 10 pixels. So what I'll do is I'll remove the event listener, which is event dot enter frame, and then we're looking for the name of the function, which in this case is move menu item. Okay. There we go. So it goes back to its original position and stops there. So we can do that for all of all of our items by simply popping this on the end. Let's put a little space in between there so I can tell the difference between that and that. Get rid of that comment, don't need it anymore. Okay, now because the target has got a property called VX, I'll then need to add that to all the other movie clips to ensure that they move. Okay, so let's copy that. Let's go to home. And then just change each one of them. And then we'll test that. So I need to save it. Control and enter. There we go. And then when we move around in that area, there's not much going on. You'll notice that currently we've actually got highlightable text in those buttons, or in those movie clips, which are acting as buttons. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a little bit of a change around, and just go into the application menu first. In the library, choose the button and select the text field, go to properties, and then in here we're going to tell it that it's not selectable. So then we test that again. You'll notice that they are no longer selectable, so they start to look a bit more presentable when you roll over them. Another thing we could try and do is actually inside of it is tell each instance that oh, there we go. So keyboard issue. This dot button mode equals true, and that should, in theory, tell every instance that they're going to act like buttons, which means when you're hovered over them, there we go. Works to a certain extent because the text field is over the top, so we can only see the edges, which is a bit of a problem. The way we'd overcome that is by having an invisible overlay. So I'll run through that now. Essentially, the colour swatch, we can use that movie clip by copying it. Then we need it to go above the label, so we'll call that overlay. We'll then right click and paste in place, so it goes directly over the top. You'll see that the text field disappears briefly. What I'm going to do is then set it to have no instance name, because we don't want any conflict there, and then set the alpha to 0. Then we can see the text field again, and I will lock the overlay so that we don't select that unexpectedly. Let's try again. And now, when you hover over it, there we go. So in theory you could have a startup script for each page that you create, or each section, where specific buttons are decorated in a specific way. So for example, you could have them all the same colour except the section that you're currently viewing. Okay, so there's one last thing that we can do, and that is to set the VX to different values for each instance. Now we could, as we had set the button mode inside of the movie clip, we could have also set the VX property inside of the movie clip, but it would have been exactly the same for each one, unless we override it in this class. So what I'm going to do is go 25, 30, 25 to 30, put 5 on the end of each one. Just to see how that works out. And you see them coming in at a slightly staggered way, and that is a little bit more interesting and aesthetically pleasing. It's just the bounce at the end that really, and you'll notice that it happens to all of them, but we can live with that for now. Okay, so the only other thing we could consider trying in that vein would be to then have them fade back out, or even fade the opacity, but as you can see you can change things incrementally using the same process. So we'll leave that there.